Good afternoon. Can I ask who joined?
This is Christy Havana.
Correct.
Thank you, Member Hovanich. We should be starting in just a few minutes here.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can I ask who joined?
Hi, this is Tom.
Hello, Member Haladinha. We should be starting in just a minute here.
Okay.
Thank you.
All around it.
Okay. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee to order. Kellen, would you please take roll?
Chairwoman Susman.
Here.
Vice Chair Geyer.
Here.
Member Amrian Beardsley. Member Bachna.
Here.
Member Haladinha.
Here.
Member Hovanich.
Present.
Member Jordan.
Here.
Member Smith.
Here.
ADE representative. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Kellen. So, Director Williams, do we have any requests to speak?
Chairwoman Susman, we do not have any requests to speak today.
Thank you. If someone just joined us,
Yes, this is Audrey.
thank you. Happy New Year. Oh, a Happy New Year to everyone.
Ditto.
So our second agenda item, if we don't have any requests to speak, is that correct, Director Williams?
That is correct.
We do not. Okay. So we will proceed with the discussion of the various assignments that the State Board of Ed gave to the Technical Advisory Committee. And we'll go through each of these agenda items.
Correct. Chairwoman / members of the committee. I would imagine that we would just go through each agenda item, and if you were the individual who was charged with this assignment or agenda item, then you can go ahead and speak to what you found through the data that you looked at since our last meeting. Please feel free to present any challenges or successes that you had so that board staff as well as department or board staff can give information to the department since they're not here currently, so that we make sure that you have the information that you need going forward. So with that, Chairwoman Schlesman, I would suggest we start with agenda item 2A, the ceiling effect, which was investigated by Member Bachna and Member Smith. And I believe Member Beardsley helped out as well. So
I'll turn that discussion over to the three of you.
Go ahead. Okay. So in looking at this, I looked at it from the static file for my own school district. I have not looked at the entire data set for the entire state, but it looks like my colleague did come down and was able to do that. In looking at just the district data that I had access to, I found that approximately 1.4% of the total population of test records fell into this ceiling effect category, where a student had an SGP of 89 or higher and an SGT of 89 or higher. So that was approximately 1.4% of the population for my district. That was split fairly evenly between ELA records and math records, and affected approximately about 50 to 60 schools, 1 or 2 kids per school, not a whole lot.
As far as looking at the state level data, I have not completed that at this time. It is incomplete. We will continue to work on the state file.
And Chairwoman Schlesman, Member Smith, and Member Bachna. Member Bachna, when you say that 1.4% of the total population fell into this ceiling effect, and you're with Mesa, what does that look like in terms of numbers? I know you said about 50 to 60 schools, one or two per school, but
yes. So we're talking about 921 test records total out of 65, a little bit over 65,000, 65,456.
Okay. All right, and then Member Smith, you were looking at the school data as well as student data, or just
student data?
Student data, okay. And when you state it was incomplete, you just need more time to complete that?
That is correct. That
okay.
Is correct.
And do you need anything from the department in order to complete that?
Maybe just some clarification on some of the files.
Okay. So if you want to just go ahead and send me an email in regards to the clarifications of those files, and I could forward them over to the department.
Okay, thank you so much.
And make sure you get that information. Looking ahead at the January 29th State Board meeting, how much time do you believe you would need in order to have findings for the entire state?
I don't think it would take much longer if we're just looking at in counts and the percent of students affected by that ceiling effect.
Week, 2 weeks?
A week.
A week, okay. That would help. Thank you. That helps us when we schedule our next TAC meeting. So maybe a week will work. Okay.
And even though this was an assignment for members Bachna, Smith, and Beardsley, we're all in this for the good of all students in the state of Arizona. So do any other TAC committee members have a comment on this? Because it is still preliminary, but we should make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
That's
Okay,
correct.
this is Tom speaking. I'd like to know the consequences of treating the ceiling effect or ignoring the ceiling effect. What effect would that have on grades? Would it have an effect on the individual students in any way?
Thank you, Member Halladine. I'm writing down your comment.
Member Halladina, to address that comment, and this is also more of a question than an answer, but we've always talked about what the impact of letter grades would be. So and we need to be mindful that the impact on the letter grade might have impact on the school. And the other thing that people have commented on throughout all of the A through F discussions, not just this committee, is that something that could impact the letter grade, the school could or could not make a decision about making certain things available to students. So if there is a ceiling effect on acceleration, it's student growth to target. So I don't know, and actually that's a good question. It's also a question that, is that within the purview of this committee, or is that a question that is a policy decision that should go to the State Board of Ed?
Thank you.
This is Audrey. I also have a question based on these numbers. From where did we get this above 89 cut score?
The business rules, in terms of how they were written, you had to have, in order to get the SGT categories, in order to achieve a high growth SGT, you had to, your SGP had to go up by 10 or more. And once you hit the 89% or 89 SGP, you do no longer have the ability to obtain the full credit for high growth.
And that was Member Bachna. Thank you. Go ahead.
And this is Audrey again. And so those business rules were based on some analyses of the data, I'm assuming then?
Yes, I assume so, right.
Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is that the business rules were developed by the Accountability Advisory Group in conjunction with ADE.
So Chairwoman Schlesman, did any of the other committee members have any other comments or concerns in regards to item 2A?
This is Christy Hovanet. I'm not sure how to articulate this yet, but we're obviously looking at the top end of the scale. I'm assuming at the bottom end of the scale, we would have the opposite impact, where schools are maybe being positively favored for really low performing schools, where the target's automatically going to be met just by the students sitting for the test. So I'm wondering if we've looked at it from that end or that perspective as well, because if we're looking at it just one-sided, then we might be systemically advantaging on one side and the other side, and then that would probably influence how we would want to handle a ceiling or a floor effect as well. So if it's happening on both spectrums, we'd want to know. And if it was the same, essentially offsetting impact, I would want to know that too. Because even if we did limit or cap or do something with the ceiling effect on the positive side, and they're also getting advantage on the lower side, then it's kind of like almost like a bonus.
Member Hovanich, thank you very much for making that comment. But I think the reason that this item was mentioned is that a look at the data showed that it was the upper end that had a ceiling effect, and there wasn't concern expressed about the lower end. But that's, again, my interpretation, so thank you for the comment, because that might be something worth looking at in the spirit of getting things moving forward so that we can have letter grades established for FY17. I'm okay with wait time, but has everyone had a chance to express concerns or ask questions so we can move forward?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, please.
So we're moving on. So the next agenda item is changing the denominator of the K-8 acceleration measure to points eligible. And Member Jordan has done quite a bit of analysis that he can share with us.
So Chairman Susman, members of the committee, as we go through each of your prepared findings, if you could also have it high level, but also bring it down a little bit so that anyone who's in the audience or watching also understands what the TAC is speaking of. If you can just remember that. Okay. Thank you.
I pretty much looked at accelerated readiness because we did have some schools that didn't get very many points for accelerated readiness. And there's the concern that schools do not have as many opportunities or options based on their demographics, the size of the school to get a lot of those points. And that, to a certain extent, that's true. But what I did, any school that has fewer than 20 students tested, they were not going to get a rating at all, just simply because of the in count in size. And as I began to dissect the data even further, schools that had 32 students tested or less, many of those schools were not rated just simply because their in count, especially in the subgroup area, was less than 20. They didn't have enough students in any one of the subcategories in order to get any additional points. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through a part of what I did to get to the one point that I'm making here, that it appears that the ad hoc committee and the accountability advisory group took into consideration that there are a wide variety of schools with different sizes and types across the district. So they made it available to where they would have numerous opportunities of scoring points within the accelerated readiness. And the maximum number of points possible within accelerated readiness is 20. However, only 10 of those points are going to be counting for the entire overall letter grade. So as I walk you through this is taken to the table straight out of the business rules. And on the high school EOC math, all schools with grades 5 through 8, very few schools have K5 and K6 schools will have students in the EOC courses. I'm sure there's a very, very small percentage of students in grades 5 and 6 and even in 7 that are in an EOC course. Most of them are going to be in grade 8. But even then, we may have some K8 schools that don't offer that as well. When we get to the grade 3 ELA minimally proficient and decreasing that, the middle schools, if they don't serve a grade 3, they're not going to have that. So in those points, it's either all or nothing, meaning that if they met that criteria, they get the 5 points. If they don't get the 5 points. If they don't serve that grade level or that particular group, they don't get any points. Let me go on down to chronic absenteeism. All schools with an in count of 20 or more, they get this, so all the schools can get that. I'm going to jump on down to special education inclusion. 2 points, once again, in count of 20 or more, they get included in that. So a total of 4 points possible for all schools across the state for those two, even the schools that were not rated for with less than 20 or less than 32. But the subgroup improvement, that was a different thing. So you sort of have a subset of points out of that group, and you're pulling that out. There's actually a total of about 40 possible points. I think that's right. Because when you have 10 subgroup areas, and each subgroup is worth 2 points, and then you have it for ELA and then math, so that takes up to 40 points possible. And one of my observations of looking at that is the larger the school and the more diverse the school, the more opportunities they're going to have to score points. And we did have a couple of schools that were able to get a total of 38 points. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is, but when they're capped at 6 points for this particular segment of the accelerated readiness, it's just one of the ways that they were able to get that. On the other end of this, we did have a handful of schools, I believe, we'll be able to see the number of schools, where their maximum total number of points that they could earn was 9. And that means that they could either get 5 points for either EOC math or 5 points for third grade mentally proficient. And then, of course, they get the 2 points for chronic absenteeism and the 2 points for special education inclusion. So that's a total 9 points possible. It's a very small number of schools. And but for the most part, everybody else, all the other schools, have mechanisms in there in which they have the opportunity of scoring a full point. So one of the things that I was kind of looking at is how to prorate for the schools that don't have that many opportunities. But when it comes down to just a 1 point difference between 9 points and 10 points total, that becomes a little bit unique. If I try to prorate it, they're still going to fall short of getting the full 10 points. But then again, as we go toggle down here in a little bit, that some of the schools were able to get the full 9 points, and I think, if I remember right, some of them were only able to get partial. And so I was kind of at a loss what to do for those schools. The other consideration that the other thing that I was looking at, if they had a limited number of opportunities of scoring points, is that necessarily a major concern? For example, if my population is small, it's going to be very easy for me to target where my needs are within my school in order to target interventions for the students within the various subgroup areas so that I can try to work toward getting those points. So let's go ahead and scroll down and we can begin to see the distribution of these. For math, what I did was I broke it down to, and this was just an estimation because what I cannot see in the data that's available to us are those schools that actually have the EOC courses and the number of students participating in that. So I'm estimating about 750 of the schools across the state are eligible for the 5 points. The other 673 are not. Same thing with the grade 3 ELA mentally proficient decrease. We have 284 schools that are not eligible, primarily because most of those are middle schools. And then we have, almost 1,140 that are eligible for that. And as I bounce down, yeah, we can go ahead and go straight to subgroup improvement because, as I mentioned earlier, for chronic absenteeism and special ed, everybody in the state is eligible. All the K-8 schools or any other variation of the grade level configuration for elementary schools have that opportunity of scoring 2 points there. So looking at the subgroup, the distribution, the total points possible, remember that's capped at 6 points. So they're either going to get 0 points, 4 points, or 6 points. And that's exactly what I could see in the data. And of the schools that got 0 points, there were just 17 schools. And one is an A school, a B school, and a C school. We had 13 schools that were not rated. The 13 schools that are not rated are all schools that have enrollment or number tested of 32 or less, so they weren't going to get that score. Of the 60 schools with 4 points, 9 of them with A's, 12 with B's, 16 with C's, and then 5 D's and 4 F's, and 14 not rated. And And I'm trying to remember the unique, I think the 14 not rated, some of those were the schools that were less than 32 also in total number tested. So that kind of gives you the distribution as to how the points for school improvement broke down across the state. Of the schools with 0 points in that 1 point getting an A and a B, they had a very high percentage of students who were at proficiency for ELA and math. So that's where they scored all their points. Going on down, staying with the subgroup distribution, I broke it down even more in terms of complete possible points. Remember, I mentioned that there's a total number of points possible based on the model of 40 points. And that particular table is going to kind of it's such a large table, it's going to be separated on 2 sheets. So if we stay on right there for a second, and then I can explain what we're looking at. And again, we have the 17 schools who didn't score any points. We had 60 schools that had 4 points. That's all they could. That's all they could earn. Most of those schools had 32 students or less tested, as I mentioned. And naturally, if that's all they could earn, that's all the points that they were going to get. So let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit farther. And let's keep going a little bit more. And these are just some of my summative notes on my observations. Let's go ahead and go down to the overall acceleration readiness. Because of those subgroup points, as those are taken out and added into the overall calculation, this is where we're getting to, is the overall accelerated readiness points. And what I did was across the top here, I've got 0 points, 2 points, 4 points, all the way up to 10 points possible. And then also I did the breakdown as to the number of students tested. I left off the number of schools that were testing 20 or less because they're below the end count of 20 anyway. And then when we look at 20 to 49, we got a total of 64 schools. 3 of the schools scored 10 points. We had 13 schools with 2 points and 4 schools with 13 points. And then you see the distribution as we go all the way down. Toward the bottom, we have some schools with about 1,000 to 1,300 kids tested. And 19 of those schools were able to get the full 10 points. And naturally, the larger schools, they have a more diverse population. They have more opportunities of scoring the full 10 points for accelerated readiness. And then we had the breakdown of the distribution of all the points in between.
Chairman Susman, Member Jordan, if we could just pause really quick as we go through this.
Sure.
If you could just go through it maybe a little bit more in depth, because when I look at this, and I see in the left-hand column of number tested, and I see 100 to 199 number of students tested, and then there's 8 schools who received 0 acceleration points. Am I reading that correctly?
Right. And of those 8 schools receiving those 0 points, those are the schools that I think had, if I remember right, and I think I made a note of that, had 32 students tested or less, meaning that they weren't going to have enough kids to get points. That's part of it.
So then the other question I have too is, so this is the points they earned. Do you have a composite table of points they are eligible to earn? Because I see it for the subgroups, I see it for the ELA grade 3, I see it for each individual one. But I'm wondering, is every school eligible to at least earn 10 points? Yeah,
I thought I included that. It's possible that I may have omitted that, because you're right, and that's one of the things that I looked at was how many points eligible could they potentially get, all schools. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit farther.
Is that table
is it the cross
titled Accelerate
on the last page?
So,
or the second to last page?
Right. Scroll on down. I have one that's accelerated readiness points earned and points eligible. It's kind of a.
So there's 9 schools that aren't eligible for 10.
No, there we go. Oh, perfect. Yep. Right. in that first column, that's the total points eligible. So we have some schools, a total of 9 schools that can earn a maximum of 9 points. We do have 11 schools that can earn a maximum of 10 points. 40 schools that could earn the maximum of 13 points, and so forth all the way down. And you see that most of our schools can earn at least 15 points or more. And you see the distribution of where those schools fell in the number of points they actually earned. But that's a good question. I did look at that. And
yeah. And remember, Jordan, the analysis was an answer to the question of if we use a denominator of points eligible, will it make a difference in letter grades? So I'm seeing that we have 9 schools that have 9 possible points. So those would be the 9 schools that would be affected by using a denominator of the points for which they are eligible, not a denominator of 10.
Right, and you look at the 2 schools that scored 4 points. If you want to make it sort of prorated to what the full 10 points would be, the total number of points that they would earn would be like a 4.3 or something like that. It's not. It's only going to give them a fraction of a point increase in the accelerated readiness score.
Right, and then looking at it from that perspective too, it would probably do a lot more schools harm than good, because you're looking at a lot of schools with now a denominator of 20 instead of 10, and a lot of schools that have a much greater denominator than 10. So every school, pretty much except for those in the first 2 rows, those 20 schools, are going from a denominator of 10 to now a denominator of something bigger, so they're actually going to lose points in their calculation. So just pointing out the impact, not that it's going to change the letter grade, but the impact is fewer points will be earned if you go to a denominator system that's something other.
Right. If we went to that, if we went to the straight total points possible, 10 points possible for accelerated readiness, a lot of schools are still going to be able to earn those 10 points, and the only schools that are affected or impacted this by a little bit are the 9 schools that have a maximum of 9 points eligible. So, I'm sort of at a loss as to what to do for those 9 schools that would be equitable in terms of being available for the full 10 points. Obviously, if they all were to have scored 9 points, then I think the logical thing to do is just award them 10 points. Thinking that 1 point might be the difference between an A or a B or a C or a D.
So, Director Williams.
Well, Chairman, Susman, Member Jordan, to that point. However, if I'm reading this correctly, points eligible of 9, those 9 schools still aren't getting all of their points. That's my
point there, because even the 10 schools, the 11 schools that have they do have the demographics for acceleration readiness and the programs that are available to where they could score 10 points. And so we have 9 schools that can't quite get there. They're close, but they're not quite there. We're 1 point short. So I'm at a loss what to do for those 9 schools. And showcasing it here opens it up for discussion or ideas, what might be some possibilities. My first inclination was, okay, if they're getting 4 points out of 9, it's just prorated, but it's only going to be like about a 4.2 or something like that. It's going to be a very, very minimal impact on the overall number of points that they're going to get.
So, Director Williams, I'm wondering how we express this best to the State Board of Education. That, and you can help us here with how we provide information back to them. I know we did a report for the December 4th meeting. I should have that date in my head. But how are they expecting, are we going to do paragraphs about each of these items or another report? How are we going to best communicate back to the State Board of Ed.
Dr. Susman, members of the committee, the State Board of Education appreciates when the paragraphs that are included in reports are easy to read and understand. However, many members also appreciate what Member Jordan did here with the graphs and showing the data and the ability to explain it. So before we even jump to what is next, I want to make sure that we completely flush this out in terms of having each committee member ask Member Jordan any questions that they may have for the acceleration readiness portion. Make sure that we're all on the same page prior to what sounds like just dismissing the board's recommendation or the board's recommendation to the TAC of potentially lowering or changing the denominator to points eligible instead of that 10. Is that what I'm hearing from you, Member Jordan? Is that it would be best to keep it at 10 and not be out of points possible or points eligible?
I would be open to looking at keeping it at 10, but is there another possible data point that we could possibly include into the accelerated readiness or within the subgroup in which schools might be able to get those additional 2 to 4 points to where they could be eligible for the full 10 points. And now that we're able to see this like this in this way, can we begin to look at some unique attributes of K-8 schools or some variation of a K-8 school so that we can get some ideas as to what might be fair and equitable so that to have one more area by which to earn points to get up to the 10 points possible. That would be one consideration.
Do
Go ahead.
Do you know which categories they're eligible for? Like, are all 9 of these schools similar looking schools, and they're all eligible for third grade ELA and something else?
Right. They're eligible for the grade 3 minimally proficient, so that's 5 points there. 2 points for chronic absenteeism and 2 points for SPED inclusion, so that's a total of 9 points. Let's say in the subgroup group, they had one particular ethnicity where they had more than 20 students. Now they could then have two additional places where they could score the additional points, 4 points, and that would put them up to 13. And of the 40 schools that are 13 points eligible, that's their circumstance, meaning that they can get one of the 2 5-point ones, and then out of the subgroup analysis, they can get up to 4 points there. So when you have 4, 4, and 6, I think that's 4, 4, and 5. That gets you up to the 13 points.
So, Member Hovanets, I want to thank you very much for bringing to our attention that if the denominator is changed to points eligible, that it's going to impact a lot of schools because Member Jordan has done an analysis of how many points schools are eligible for. Well, the other thing I was going to add in is that, and I don't remember exactly which measure it was, but in the previous A through F model, when there was like a point given to schools just because the math didn't work out. So that is a possibility for a decision that the State Board of Ed makes as a policy decision. And I'm looking at Director Williams. Is that a technical concern or?
Dr. Susman, I'm going to be honest, I was not listening to you because I was looking at this graph right here that I have a question for Dr. Jordan. So can you repeat your question, please?
Okay, well, first of all, I thanked Member Hovanich for talking about if the denominator is changed to points eligible, it's going to impact more than the 9 schools that aren't eligible for the 10, but it would also impact all these other schools that are eligible for different amounts of points. So that's one consideration.
Chairman Susman, members of the committee, I I think with that conversation, I think that has to go with the math and how you prorate it and the different weights and how it would affect others. It still would be out of 10 points, but what I'm understanding from Member Jordan is how the mathematical equation would work for those schools.
Yeah, it would only be limited to the schools who have a maximum of 9 points possible, because the way that the model was designed, even though there's a total of 20 points possible, they're only going to be limited to 10 points, meaning that if a school has 20 points, and we see like 419 schools are eligible for 20 points for accelerated readiness, they're only going to get 10. They get a maximum of 10. So they're limited there. So prorating it or changing the denominator doesn't really make any sense. So especially when I broke it down and I see that it's only 9 schools and 9 schools that are just 1 point away, and even prorating that to where it's equitable to like a full 10 points doesn't really get them to where they're actually going to impact their letter grade probably, unless they're really, really, really close. Yeah, 4 point. It's going to be either in this case for 2 schools 4 points, or it's going to be 4.2. If it's 2 points that they're getting, it's going to be only a fraction of that. Obviously, if it's 0, it's 0.
Yeah, and the other part of my comment was in the previous A through F model, and I think it was SGP, because it only went up to 99. There was like a point that was just given to schools. So that would be another policy decision for the State Board of Ed to say, well, if it's 9 schools and it's that close, maybe we'll just give them that point.
So Dr. Susman and members of the committee, I wrote that note down.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if you would allow for myself to ask Member Jordan some questions in regard to the second page of his presentation. So looking at the first chart that we have here, EOC math distribution of schools by letter grade, and we have 0 points possible for the 673 schools. When we talked about the 3rd grade ELA minimally proficient decrease, the schools that received 0 points possible, you stated that the 284 schools mostly were middle schools who did not receive those points. So of the 673 that received 0 points possible of the EOC math, why was that?
Those are going to be all of the schools that do not include a grade 8, because I just went by grade 8 because I'm quite confident that a lot of the schools that serve a grade 8 are going to offer algebra or geometry to their 8th grade students. I also know that there's going to be a number of schools across the state, K-8 schools and K-7 schools even, that may offer algebra to their grade 7 students, maybe even geometry. But in the data that I have, I don't know which schools do that or not. I can't tell it, so I have to estimate it. So I'm only estimating based on what I see in my own district. Also, having taught grades 5 and 6 across the state, there's not a doubt in my mind we're going to have a handful of students who may be enrolled in a end-of-course algebra or geometry class, but it's going to be an extremely small number of students. So I did not include that. So that's 673, and that's probably not going to be completely accurate, but it's going to be a close estimate.
So Chairman Susman, Member Jordan, so the 673 schools that do not have a grade 8, are those schools being picked up in the grade 3 ELA minimally proficient decrease in that 1139?
Yes, because everybody that's included in the K3 in the 3rd grade, it's going to be all your K3 schools, K4, K5, K6, K7 schools. So that's going to include them. Even in the K8 schools, they're going to be included in that. Okay. So it's the only ones that are not. And we have 3 of those schools in my district and that are 4-8 schools, so they're not going to be included in the grade 3.
Okay, so going into my next question.
Okay.
Me thinking out loud. So if you have a school who potentially does not earn any points in EOC math, 0 points in ELA minimally proficient decrease, they could potentially pick up 10 points in chronic absenteeism, subgroup improvement, and special education. Because with special education, you're saying that all schools have this metric as well as the chronic absenteeism Correct.
Right, chronic absenteeism and special ed inclusion, all schools have that metric.
Okay.
Now, it's possible that there may be some schools that don't serve that many special ed students within that school. So, but I can't tell that in the data that we have. And so they may be in a situation where they, just by design, they can't meet that. It's just never going to happen. So that's, and unless I can get more detailed data about some of the schools specifically, and that's when I'm talking about some of the more unique attributes of individual schools, what other metrics could we possibly include into either the subgroup improvement distribution or the overall accelerated readiness, so that those schools have other opportunities to score the 2 points. That makes a little bit more sense to me.
Okay. And
So,
just...
so as a related question, so all schools have this SPED indicators. You're saying there's also SPED bonus points, which aren't included in the total 100 points. And if all of these 9 schools have the eligibility to earn those SPED bonus points, is that something else we should look at and consider and see if because they earned those bonus points where other schools might not be eligible. So we don't address bonus points at all in this context either.
Right. If I remember right about the bonus points, there was some discussion about whether or not the bonus points should be added at the end of the overall calculation or before, because here, from my understanding in the preliminary letter grades, it was included prior to the final calculation. I don't know if the ADE was going to rerun some of that analysis and take a look. I'm trying to recall from the prior meetings.
Yeah, Member Jordan, my understanding from ADE was that they were going to rerun it to run the numbers first, and after that, doing that, then add the bonus points.
And that may have been a request by the State Board of Education itself.
Chairman Susman and Member Jordan, that was discussed at the December 4th meeting in which the board voted to have bonus points awarded after setting the cut score, not including.
Okay.
So I think that's, I don't know if it's a solution or not, but just for consideration, that's where they can make up those points to get to 100, essentially, is they're awarding bonus points for schools that have SPED enrollment above the state average or whatever.
Yes, is this Member Hovanich that made that comment?
Yes.
In a sense, that is true, but this is specifically the K-8 acceleration measure, whereas the bonus points are a bonus to the entire model.
And I understand that, but we're talking about, do we do something as fancy as try and change the denominator, but only if the school isn't eligible for an X number of points, and if so, then it's only a negligible 0.2 or 0.1 additional points. Doesn't make sense to complicate the calculation that isn't actually going to make a difference in the overall, in the grand scheme of overall points earned, and know that because these 9 schools did have the SPED component, are also eligible to earn the bonus points. So it's not like they're not capable of earning a full 100 points on their overall calculation. They're just missing one. I'm just trying to think of all possible options, because randomly awarding 1 point just to get them up to 10 seems weird. Having a different business rule for how to calculate a component for specific schools seems a little bit complicated and nuanced. So just trying to think through all the different ways this could be tackled without overburdening the system.
Yeah, and let me add, from attending a lot of the State Board of Education meetings in which the advisory group was sharing out their work, I think one of the things, even as a request from the State Board of Education, they were looking at additional ways that schools could earn points that weren't necessarily tied to the AZ merit or an assessment. So that's why the chronic absenteeism, the special ed inclusion were added to that. And it may be looking at other possible data points, looking forward and kind of going down that avenue, you might say, to help schools that, like the 9 schools that we have here that are limited to a maximum of 9 points that they can earn.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On the chart with the points eligible versus acceleration readiness points earned, on the second to last page, when we look at our schools, where I'm looking at the line with 15 points eligible, and the schools that earned 10 points were 550 of them. They might have earned more than those 10 points, right? It's just that it's capped.
Right.
So we can't really see the full extent of what's happening behind the scenes with what we've looked at, right?
Right.
Okay.
So in that, you get to see what caught my attention as I was analyzing the data and then trying to present it in a number of different ways so that we could see the distribution and see the breakdown and see how schools fared in terms of the total points earned based on how they were eligible and their overall letter grade.
I guess my point on that is if we change the denominator, and we're talking about not changing the denominator or changing it, if those schools actually could have earned more points than 10, would the numerator also be affected?
I'm going to say probably, because that's the direction that I was heading initially, and the more that when I saw that schools could earn as many as say like 40 points for the subgroup, and that's being a subset of the overall where they could earn a maximum of 20. So if you start putting a denominator in it, you're not going to have that many schools getting the 6 points for the subgroup. You're not going to get that many schools or as many schools getting the full 10 points. So it takes them in a little bit different direction that I think is different than what the ad hoc committee had agreed upon when they put this all together.
Got it. Thank you.
So, Dr. Susman and Member Jordan at this time, Member Jordan, is there anything that you need that you feel as if you want to look into for further research that would allow for you to have, like, a well-rounded report? And I can let the department know.
Are you asking about any additional data sets or pieces of information that would help? I don't have anything off the top of my head right now. It's because some of the things that I would be asking for would be somewhat detailed that are unique to particular schools. Because we're getting to the point now we're looking at why some schools have the points that they have, and we're trying to answer that question. Is there something in the overall model that needs to be addressed so that every school can have a letter grade? And like I said, for the EOC math, I have no idea which schools across the state have actual numbers of kids enrolled in EOC math courses and taking the EOC AZ merit test. I just don't know because that's not in the data set. And I'm picturing in my mind that might be a very large data file. But it's something that I don't know. Also, the other piece that I don't know of schools with special ed inclusions, which schools do not cater to special ed students, period, based on their charter. And that's what I don't know. I don't know if that's even possible. So that's an unknown to me, and I'm sure it's going to be a very, very small number of schools across the state because a lot of them are going to be accommodating students with disability to some degree. So I'm trying to think of some of the other things that might be pertinent to the analyses that would make it more complete, or give them, or to provide some additional ideas on how to provide a couple more ways that schools could earn points for accelerated readiness or within the subgroup.
Subgroup. Okay. Thank you for that presentation, Member Jordan. Did any other committee members have any questions for Member Jordan?
Director Williams, I have one question. Member Jordan, you indicate in your tables under the heading Overall Acceleration Readiness Points you referenced number tested. Is that referring to the total number at the school or the number of FAE students?
Number of FAE students tested. If you remember the data set that we get, we have one column where it shows the total number of students FAE tested, and that's an aggregate between ELA and math both. But I'm more interested into the overall in count that they have in the student because we're assuming that all students were tested in ELA and math. And so when you see 40, we could easily assume that they had actually 20 students enrolled FAY at that point at the time of taking the EASY merit. And that's one of the analysis that I did also, was breaking it down so that, because I was wanting to know exactly how many students were tested in ELA or math, either one, just one subject, because that's a part of what we're getting at to the end count, especially when we get into chronic absenteeism and SPED inclusion and some of those other categories. So it's separate from aggregating together for overall proficiency, regardless of content. So,
okay.
This is Tom speaking. I have a couple of comments or questions. And one of the comments was that I found the tables hard to read, and I thought that they could use some polish. And for instance, tables ought to be numbered, pages ought to be numbered. And the numbers in there are interesting, and they kind of show a bias, but it's not real clear. And I think the bias is that the kids who are not getting points possible, are not getting points, are the lower graded schools. So it seems to me it would be better to change those numbers to percentages in each row, and it would be easier to interpret. And also, isn't the report not complete? I was looking at something at the end, looking for a conclusion or recommendations, and I didn't see anything. It's maybe it's because we don't really have anything yet. But isn't that the point of the report?
Well, as I was putting this together and I was beginning to try to close it off, I really didn't have any hard recommendations or ideas. The only observation that I had is that I got 9 schools that have a maximum of 9 points possible, and I don't know what to do for them. So,
right.
And you're right, it would be a bit more polished if I were to, if I'd taken the time to number the tables, but I was on vacation. So.
I know. But I'm thinking if we go to the board with this, we and the board members trying to, we want to make it as reasonable and easy to read as possible. So I think that would be some more polish on it would make it very nice. I think I found the tables very, very intuitive.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate what you're sharing, but part of what I was wanting to do is start off with this entire group, and because among all of us, maybe we have can generate an idea that might be beneficial or work within the model.
And Chairman Susman, Member Haladina, to that point, we do have Member Bachna and Member Smith and Member Beardsley who are going to come back with some of their thoughts on the ceiling effect for the growth to the student growth to target at the next meeting. So maybe for the following meeting, Member Jordan can implement some of your suggestions that you have for him and bring that back to the committee.
Okay, good.
So have all of us on the TAC had opportunity to make a comment or ask a question on 2C? Actually, I'm 2B is what it was. I'm anticipating the next one, which is 2C. So in anticipation of the next agenda item, I did the simple calculation of answering the question, what would happen if we lowered the N count of the English language learner measure? And because there was only one table, I did not number it, Member Haladina. So as you see, I used version 3.1 of the data files that were provided for both K-8 and 912 by the Arizona Department of Education. And I presented the number of schools, both K-8, high school, and then the total of ELL FAE students from the numbers 11 through 19. I did not go below presenting publicly below 11 because that won't be publicly reported anyway. And then I did include just a little bit of discussion, pending discussion at the meeting today, that the weighting of the English language learner proficiency and growth indicator is 10% of each framework. And I did say, although I did not detail them in this on vacation or on break report, that when we had discussions earlier about end count, we agreed that there were multiple technical reasons not to lower the number of students used for a school to be eligible to earn those points. I guess that the reason this was asked again was the spirit of making points available to more schools. But the reasons that we have cited for not reducing the end count as a technical advisory group, and we can repeat them now if we need to do that or in any report that goes to the board, I don't see that those reasons have changed for calculating the English language learner measure, because we cited reasons like when you go below 20, the one or two students can make a vast difference in a mean. We talked about standard error of measurement, and you can chime in again on the other reasons if we need to detail those more.
Chairman Susman, members of the committee, the board as well as board staff, we're aware of the committee's concerns in regard to lowering the end count. However, with the recent information that the ELL portion of the A through F letter grade system can have a lower end count, it was the desire of the board to have this technical advisory committee look into lowering the end count for the ELL measure so that more schools would be able to be picked up. And from this report, it looks as if there are approximately 256 schools, if you lower the end count to 11, that could potentially be picked up in this indicator.
That is correct. That was what the data files showed.
And Dr. Susman, if you could help me answer this question, when you looked at potentially lowering the end count, are you able to manipulate the data that's supplied by the department in such a way where if you put in lower the end count to 11, you could see what happens to those schools who potentially were not rated in that indicator and see where they end up?
And thank you, Director Williams, because I thought about that, but then I realized that we were talking about some other modeling that could take place to bring ratings for the non-rated schools. And so I did not do that yet, pending that type of modeling. I thought there's no reason to do it now and then have it change for the future. So I know that's the next step question. And so as we talk about moving forward in the work of this committee, I would anticipate that the committee members might say, yes, let's wait until we figure out a way to rate the non-rated schools, which is agenda item D, and we may need to revisit this.
And Chairman Susman, members of the committee, you stated like how to rate the non-rated schools, but in addition to the non-rated schools, my question is also of those K-8 schools who are only based out of 90 points because they could not reach the end count of the ELL calculation. So how many of those 80-point schools who have already received a letter grade could potentially see an increase or decrease in their letter grade based upon lowering the end count? And then the same would go for the high school.
Director Williams, I have a question for clarification. You have mentioned that there was a reason for looking at it. The only reason I'm bringing this up is I know this is part of the model for the ESSA application, and it had been pretty clear in the law that said that all subgroups had to have the same end count. So have you heard from or talked with the U.S. Department of Education to allow them to set a a lower N size for ELs?
Chairman Susman, I'm not sure who that was on the phone, but it was from my knowledge from the department that the department spoke with the U.S. Department of Education and that we could have a different N count for ELL.
As long as it was smaller.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
As long as it was smaller, that it was okay to go with a smaller N size.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and who was that asked that question?
This is Christy.
Okay.
Christy, okay. So, Member Hovanich, I also thought about that, thinking I would like to see, I was going to quote the portion of ESSA that allowed that. And so I don't know, and again, because it was over break, I didn't push it. But would it help to have it check with someone at ADE and say, is this actually part of the ESSA statute, or was it in communication with the U.S. Department of Ed?
Chairman Susman, members of the committee, board staff will reach out to the department and get that in an email or written language for the committee if the committee so wishes.
Thank you.
Do you have Member Susman, do you have any idea how many of these schools on your table were not rated?
I didn't do that analysis for the reason that I talked about earlier. It didn't seem relevant at this time if we're going to change the way that we find out who is rated and who is not.
Perfect, thank you.
Chairman Susman, members of the committee, for the next meeting, Dr. Susman, is there more information that you could provide to the committee as well as to myself in regard to the ELL? So Member Bachna had asked the non-rated schools, most of them who received an NR because of the non-typical grade configurations. Typically, I think for myself, in order to see what we're working on, I need to see how many.
I can do the breakdown of, I'll just take as an example 15 FAE ELL students. Of those 17 K-8 schools, break it down for what their letter grade is, their preliminary letter grade is, or NR. I can do that. Okay. And then the 4 high schools do the same thing. So I can do that analysis, and depending how fast the next meeting.
Is there another committee member who is available to help Dr. Susman with this work for the next meeting? Because I know we picked 15, but...
Well, that was just an example. Oh. But if you want to see all 9...
I think all 9 would be beneficial to the board.
Okay. It's possible that I could do it in a week, but I'll have to check the schedule, and I'll know how fast I can make it available.
Okay. Is this something that maybe...
I'm speaking. Even if we do this, aren't we still recommending the same thing? That there's, with the small N counts, there's just too much risk involved, that the random error and systematic error is so great that it would swamp any kind of valid interpretation?
Thank you, Member Haladina, because that has been our concern throughout, and I would like, if we go forward with data, to remind the State Board of Ed of all those concerns, or all those, I won't even say concerns, all those technical reasons that lowering N count, because I have worked with schools that have been in accountability systems that use N counts of like 11 or 12, and as you know, 1 or 2 students it's the variation in the numbers, not necessarily the program of the school, that accounts for a fluctuation.
I would also add, I think will become a little bit more confusing to explain why the N count is 20 for everything but one thing.
And Chairman Susman, members of the committee, I think all of the concerns and statements and points could be included in the report that you send to the board so that they have a full picture. It was something that President Carter has spoken about numerous times, of having everyone's opinion, whether it's for or against, to have that specifically laid out for the board members so that they understand where each member of the technical advisory committee is coming from with their recommendation. So, Chairman Slashman, members of the committee, going back, is there a committee member who could potentially help Dr. Slashman with this work? Feels comfortable? Maybe someone who's already finished with their work?
Actually, it isn't going to be that much work as long as the time can be carved out.
Okay. All right.
It might be just an hour or two.
So, Chairman Slashman, we can have this for the next meeting? Okay.
In the best intent, yes.
Thank you.
If I have a problem, I'll let you know, Director Williams.
Okay, thank you. And then, Dr. Susman, is there any other additional information from the department in terms of data that you would need to see in order to fully flesh out?
I want to compliment the department on getting this to us so quickly, and the types of questions that we have raised should be available with the data that is currently available.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Before we leave this topic, though, Director Williams, it would be great if each of us could send Director Williams an email to talking about the concerns or issues, I should say issues, of lowering end count. So we have that for the next meeting. And
okay, so Dr. Slashman, members of the committee, if you all want to send your individual comments in regard to lowering the end count with your statements of concern, and then what I can do along with board staff is we can put that into a document, like Word document, and we can have that available at the next meeting. Okay.
So have we all had a chance to comment the way I see a pen moving over here, or are you just ready to go, Member Geyer, with 2D? I'm trying to do some nonverbals as well as.
Yeah.
So are we ready to go with 2D?
Well, I was just going to say, I am, as part of my work in 2D, the entire model for both K to 8 and a 9 to 12 were being, I was working with those data, so I definitely was looking at the ELL data as well and everything. I don't have any systematic comments on the entire state because I was just looking at the non-typical grade configurations. But, yeah, I have nothing else other than the next.
Okay. Well, then I'm getting the nonverbals and moving on. So let's go with utilizing the hybrid model, Member Geyer.
Okay. Yes, what I was looking at specifically was adopting the hybrid model, a so-called hybrid model, basically just a combination of models 2 and 4 from the original board options available for dealing with non-typical grade configurations. And looking at the different options here, I've labeled them A, which is to merge schools without grade 12 to the K to 8 model. So that would be Model A. Model B would be to take schools that include grade 12 but begin with the 5th grade or higher, to merge those schools because they've received 2 grades into the 9 to 12 model. And then the final approach would be to adopt essentially model or option 4, which is to use proration for schools with grades K 1, 2, 3, 4 to grade 12. Use proration with the K to 8 grade and the 9 to 12 grade. So that's the so-called hybrid model. Now, looking into the data, I took a deep dive into the data between the holidays and before and after, and looking at specifically, I was interested in what effects would this have on the grading, and secondarily, what effects would this have on the number of schools who did not receive a rating. And I took some liberties with how to approach the hybrid model with schools that received an NR in one or the other grade configurations. You'll see those discussions, the specific methods that I was using down below. So just looking here at the number of schools that qualified for each of the 3 different approaches, for Model A, you had 7 schools without a grade 12 that required the adoption of the K-8 model. 55 schools that required the adoption of the 9-12 model, and 46 that were prorated using FAE proficiency enrollment.
And Chairman Susman, Member Geyer, of those 46 that were prorated using FAE enrollment, were most of those K-12 schools, or did you see?
I have a number. It's in my bag under my desk, but
Okay, we'll get it later.
It's like 40 of 46.
Okay.
Just going from memory. The majority of them were K-12 schools.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So getting into the question of missing data became an apparent and necessary thing to deal with from the very beginning, because I encountered situations in which a school that would be merged to the high school model, in which the high school model only requires 50 points. So it's possible to receive a grade for the high school model despite not receiving a actual point score for proficiency or growth. So if I'm going to merge into the high school model, I'm going to have schools rated on K-8 and 9-12 that are going to have missing data in somewhere in the model. So for that reason, I had from the very beginning, had to come up with a method to dealing with missing data. And it's a very straightforward method in which I essentially took all of the relevant data that was available and weighted it by the appropriate N count for that data element. For instance, for growth, it would be the SGP and SGT FAE students provided in the data file, number of FAE students for SGP and SGT, to get the merge growth score. So that was sort of the missing data consolidation method here. I'm just noting under the heading missing data. This method provides a data consolidation method almost out of necessity to estimate the A to F grade when some data is otherwise missing. And we require that 20 student count in order to meet the requirements for our sample. One other thing I wanted to note regarding missing data, I'm working with the department on getting additional data for students. Well, we're going to see how this turns out in terms of actual calculation. But in the situation in which a school does not have 20 students at FAE for full annual year, currently the data is shown as missing 0, no numbers available. So the hope is let's say a school has 19 students FAE in high school and 80 in K-8, we could then use those 19 students' data toward this merger rather than just having nothing there at all. So that's something that's in progress right now. So estimation, I realize this is kind of into the land of formulas. I apologize for that. I'm basically just getting sort of how this is actually calculated and sort of the steps that I took to combine data. You can see here for obtaining a single growth score, it's basically what I was mentioning earlier. We take the ELA and math, SGP and SGT scores available, and combine them using the full annual year enrollment. So it's basically a weighted average, and that becomes a single number. Depending on which model we're merging into, the number of growth points possible is either 50 or 20, because that's the number of growth points in the K-8 model, 50. 20 is the number of growth points possible in the 9-12. All right, so again, I realize we're getting into the weeds here of the business rules of the A to F accountability model, but that's kind of what this whole process really is. The hybrid model is merging business rules across 2 different grade configurations and models. So again, bear with me on this as we get through it here. Proficiency. We have the variable proficiency rate, which is essentially a combination of all 3 years' proficiency data for K-8 schools. This is, based on what I could see in the data file, the most comparable proficiency variable to compare to the high school proficiency, which is based on a single year. So just to be clear, K-8 uses up to 3 years of proficiency data. The 9-12 model only uses 1. So in order to have an equitable comparison, I use the essentially rate variable from K to 8 and the overall proficiency from 9 to 12. And that just gets merged together using the N count into a single proficiency score. And then I give the actual list of variables that were merged together to estimate Model A and Model B. This is just for reference. It really is just the list of total points that you have in the 8F accountability model for these different things. And you'll notice that ELL proficiency and growth, 10 points, has a star by it under the bottom of the first page of my report, and also at the top of the second page. And that's because no school in either of the so-called Model A or B hybrid approach, that is unusual grade configuration without, say, grades K1, 2 in it in grade 12, qualified for an ELL merger. It was a general trend in these schools that were in this 108 group. They did not have enough students for the ELL merger. I don't want to get into why that was the case, if it was because the majority of them were, say, charter schools, if it was because there were smaller splittings of the sample sizes, because, say, we had a 7 to 12 school, so we were cutting 7, 8, and then 9 to 12 in two different buckets. I don't want to get into that right now, but
I will comment, Member Geyer, that you were using the 20, the established number of FACE student, ELL FACE students.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And I required at least one of the two to have 20 in order to do a merge, because I don't want to do an NR merger, because that would be getting well beyond the ranges of this, what we're trying to do with this method.
And the reason I'm asking that question is you probably, other committee members anticipate that if we lower the N count for ELL, it's going to impact this part of the merger also.
Yeah, it has the potential to, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had to ask the question while we were on it, because please go. Please go ahead.
So I guess we could continue with the different models, or we could move into some actual results. I'm feeling like we just talked all about the hybrid model A, hybrid model B. Let's actually see what these models do. So if you could scroll down, flip to the third page, and look at preliminary results. So what we have here is and Dr. Haladini, yes, I did number the tables. That's
Thank you.
my advisor in graduate school just drilled that into me very, very deep, and it will never stop. So I enable I number everything in any document, even if it's like for in-company PowerPoint. So here for table 1, merging to K8, there were only 7 schools, or were there 8? It looks like I'm just totally miscounting that right now. 3, 5, 7. Yeah, 7 schools, which we merged to K8. There are their results, the current K to 8 grade, the current 9 to 12 grade. And I'm calling this a preliminary hybrid grade. This is because this is still very preliminary. There's a whole bunch of modeling being done by the TAC, as we are all well aware, of the various measures that could potentially change these grades and the board's policy decisions regarding how to assign grades to these schools. This is just done so we have something to see what happens. I'm comparing the preliminary hybrid to the prorate. And I calculated the prorated letter grade just to give us a comparison of how the hybrid model compares to the prorate model for these schools. So let's just take this one example school here that was a C, not rated. Well, because I'm taking all of the available information for that school and merging it together, obtaining a merge growth, a merge proficiency, ELL, which didn't happen, and then all the other measures for that appropriate model, we can actually assign a letter grade to a CNR school. And in this particular one school here, they actually received a higher letter grade from the hybrid model than they had received originally. And I included an asterisk just to note why that occurred for your records for transparency, and also so I didn't forget. The reason that happened was that school in particular had a much higher proficiency score for 9 to 12 compared to K to 8. When we merged those two values together, it raised their percentage a couple points. They were near the cut. It raised their grade. So that's why we have a CNR becoming a B. because we merged any relevant information we could get from the 9 to 12 model into the K to 8 model to obtain the best estimate of their letter grade. So obviously, all NR and Rs are going to be NR because there's still some decisions regarding missing data and how we're going to handle it going forward. So I didn't even try to do anything with NRs because I had no data for them. So we have an app. You can just look through the grades that are provided here in Table 1. And you can see that there are going to be occasions in which the hybrid approach and the prorated approach differ in the grades assigned. These generally are schools in which we had non-adjacent grades. You're not going to see them in Table 1, but in Table 2, I actually put all of the non-adjacent grade schools in a separate section of a table. Mm-hmm. So we can look at those more closely. So with that said, nothing more on Table 1. Moving to Table 2. Again, you can see, just in terms of the impact of the proposed approach that's been used so far, we've already, using this approach, we've reduced the number of not rated schools in the first table from 3 out of 7 to 1 out of 7. So we've reduced 2 schools from the missing data pool using this approach. Obviously, if we prorate, we can't prorate a not available with a number because then it's not available anyway. It's missing data. Right. So in Table 2, you have, again, the top section. I divided this into categories for these 2 tables. You have all the not rated schools up in the top first section. There were actually 9 schools that had some part of their data not rated. And actually, I just know here, there was one school that, and this is one that I just reported it for reference. For some reason, it had just like a piece of data here, a piece of data there, and a piece of data in other places within the 2 models to cobble together 50 points to get a grade in the high school model. I'm not sure that we want to be doing a grade like that, so just be aware of that. NRF there is sort of like you have one thing in one model and another thing in another model, and it kind of lumped together. For the 2 schools that were NRC, they both stayed in the C category. For the 2 NRBs, they stayed a B, and then we have a CNR that remained a C. So those all stayed the same as their not rated grade, even though any available information we could get was merged into it for growth and proficiency. So that actually reduces the number of not rated schools by at least 5 out of the 9, because there were a number of them there. And now for the non-adjacents. One thing that, there was one school in particular that stood out to me that when I was looking at this the first time, and that was an FB school. You'll notice that the FB school, when you prorate it, gets a C, but when you actually use the hybrid model, it gets a B. So you're going to ask yourself, well, how can a school that's an F in K to 8 receive a B in the 9 to 12 model? And the answer is that we are merging into that 9 to 12 model where a significant amount of the points, 40 in this case, were based on college and career readiness and graduation. So this FB school, by chance, had very good college and career readiness and graduation results that when we merged into that particular model, it turned the FB, rather than becoming a C, into a B. So, yeah, the proficiency growth would pull it down a little bit, but the college and career readiness results pulled it up. Similarly, the same thing happened for the FC, CA schools. Graduation rate, college and career readiness results, among others, pulled up their grade from just being an average of the 2. If the school had very, very low performance in, say, growth and proficiency, that was why they had the grade they did, say an FB, they had very low results in one category, that would drag down their grade if it was hybrid merged together. I just want to be clear on that. we're not literally just taking the higher of the two letter grades. It may look like it at times, but it's not how it works. As we saw with that other K-8 school, it's potentially possible for a school to go up or down on the grade based on the information we can get.
So, Chairman Susman, Member Geyer, if I can ask a question.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Just looking at that first one, FB, and then prelim hybrid's a B. So if that current K-8 was, let's say they're very low in proficiency right now, and next year they increase their proficiency, then because it's merged, they have the potential of actually moving up to an A grade.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So by them having potentially low proficiency in their grades that fall under the K-8, although their CCRI and their grad rate is very good, as you stated, that's why they have the B, because their K-8's actually bringing them down a little bit because potentially their proficiency is really low, or their growth is really low, or something's really low in the K-8.
It was actually the case that their proficiency and growth were like right in the 40 zone percent.
Okay.
Yeah. So, which is where that F comes from, because the high grade cut for K-8 is 50% to get a D.
Okay.
Yes, that's what's happening there.
So the 912 is not overshadowing the K-8.
Right.
Okay. That's just okay. Thank
you. So on the key measures here, 40 points of the measures, which is nearly the same as the proficiency and growth combined, they got all points basically. Yeah.
Thank you, Member Geyer.
So, and again, I realize that's why I highlighted these three results, because they are the FB especially is so striking. Mm-hmm. But it was a 7 to 12 school, so it only had 2 grades in the K-8 model anyway.
So for the most part in Table 2 and Table 1 as well, it seems that the preliminary hybrid letter grades are better than the comparison prorated in terms of how this plays out, with the exception of one of the schools. Of the 5 schools that are D in K-8 and C in 912, one of those stays a D in the preliminary hybrid. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, thank you. And just to demonstrate some evidence for how close sometimes things are with these schools and grades and cuts, I believe the 2 models were different by 0.0 some percent, so small. I think it might have been 0.01. It wasn't even a percent. It was like partial percent, like 0.1%. That's what it was, 0.1%. But I cut them at 55.5, or at the 0.5% line, the roundup line. So it literally cut their grade off. It was like 0.0 some percent, very small number. That's why I put the asterisks. These were really close, those ones that are marked between the two, why they're different.
So the correlation between the two is very, very high then, like almost perfect?
Yes, it is nearly perfect, yeah.
Okay.
The difference is that we are able to take into account more information with the hybrid model and also handle not rated schools. So it's likely going to be a more consistent or stable measure over time than the other, because there's more information in it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're not going to get an AF in the hybrid versus prorate comparison by any stretch.
Sorry.
Any other questions regarding the 2 tables? If not, we can move on to the prorate. So I didn't have a lot to say about the method for the prorate approach. It literally is just taking the proficiency fake count and the 2 percentages from the 2 models with the proficiency fake count and calculating a weighted average and using that weighted average to obtain the grade. That was all that was done. That's according to the business definition in the original document provided by the State Board of Education. That's what I did for that. So that's just a proration. I have some sort of a proposal for something I would call like an adapted model C. I don't know if we want to get into that now or if we want to wait till after I go through the third table. I think we can go through the third table and then get into that, because that gets more into missing data related concerns. So if you want to flip to table 3, you are already there. Excellent. Thank you. So what I did for table 3 is this is just proration. So all of the not rated schools are going to stay not rated because we're not doing any hybrid approaches here. Not rated means not rated. There were, I believe, 46 schools in this category for the proration, of which there were, looks like, 15, 20 schools that were not rated out of the 46. Just to be clear, actually I included table definition information in the bottom of this document, just so everyone knows exactly what's in what's row or column in the table. So you can see that the grade K to 8 cut is the letter grade determined using the K to 8 model cut scores. And the grade 9 to 12 cut is the letter grade determined using the 9 to 12 model cut scores. My understanding is that it is a state board policy decision which grading model to use for these sort of prorated schools. And I didn't want to even get into that here with this data. So I just gave you both grades. And I believe there was only one difference between the two. The first row under the not rated section where there was an F and a D. Question?
Yes. So at the top here, you've got 1D, 4C, 3B, 1A under the current K8. And then under prorated K8, they're now NRs. So do those 9 schools lose their letter grade?
Do they lose their letter grade? My understanding is that, well, they would lose their letter grade right now, yes. They would be let's say ANR, BNR. Yeah, their overall school-wide grade would be NR because part of their grade is missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you had student-level data, you might be able to recoup that?
Yes, that's where the sort of adapted model C comes into play. It's essentially something where we sort of do a mini hybrid model on the not rated schools to try and get a rating for them. Again, that's something I feel was left for further discussion, possibly even with the board on how they want to handle that, because it is a special case. I left it as something for our discussion and for further review, how to deal with that. So let's say you had a DNR there. Could you not just give the, prorate into the D grade? That's an open question. Thank you.
Chairman
Director
Susman, members of the committee, I might be jumping ahead, so if I am, Member Geyer, you just let me know. With a lot of the conversations I've had following the December 4th board meeting where the board gave this direction to the Technical Advisory Committee, and then reviewing your overview of B, where it says schools that include grade 12 but begin with grade 5 adopt the higher 912 model. And from what you've discussed today, my understanding is that you're merging the data into the 912 model, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if we take a look at the lower grades, K through 4, if we look at K2, K2 is being calculated in the K8 model only for chronic absenteeism. Third grade's being calculated for proficiency but no growth, because from my understanding there's not 2 years of growth, and they would potentially be calculated in the acceleration measure for a decrease in the minimally proficient. Fourth grade would be seen in both growth and proficiency. So is there anything that hinders merging a K-12 into a 912, but using that calculation that you used for the 5th through 12th grade?
So you're saying merging into the 912 model?
Even if it's a K-12. Whatever mathematical magic you used for this 512 merge to get a letter grade, right? Because even in some of these that had NRs, you were able to, with the prelim hybrid, able to find a letter grade for those NRs. And yes, you said some of them might only be 712, so they might not be that low. But if we're having such an issue with the prorated, especially with the NR schools, I don't know mathematically how merging the two together.
Yeah, that was actually the proposed idea. It wasn't necessarily to merge into 912, but it was to merge into whichever side of the model had the data in it. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was always the K-8 side. It was likely a school that was growing into a senior class level configuration. Maybe they just started having 12th graders in their school and they didn't have enough for the high school measures and they dropped out. I don't know. It's one possible scenario. So that's an open question. Do we merge into a K-8? Do we merge into 912? What do we do? Do we just take the grade that's available and leave it? Those are all possible outcomes. Any other questions on that? And just then, with that said, if you go back to the prior page, I actually provided some information on what I call an adapted model C, a so-called adapted prorate of the grades. This is something that attempts to take whatever data is available for the configuration that was graded. So if a school is rated on K-8 or 912 only, is proposed to merge proficiency, growth, and ELL as available to calculate a merge letter grade using whichever model was actually graded. It could be one model or the other. That's up to policy decisions or how that wants to be approached. That's basically my idea for how to deal with this. Essentially adopting model A or model B when one configuration does not provide sufficient data to estimate a letter grade. My thinking on this when I proposed this was, if we have a school that's, say, B and R, why not take as much information as we can get about that school to give them the best letter grade that we possibly can? B and R, take all the proficiency, growth, ELL data we can get for both models, merge that together, and give them the best estimate of their grade as possible. The alternative would be to give them no grade or just the higher of the two grade, or just the grade. So that was my thinking with that so-called adapted model C.
Dr. Susman, I think that was what I was trying to communicate to you. For those about 20 schools in that prorated model that are NR.
Yeah, thank you, Director Williams.
Yeah.
And again, one thing that I'm going to work with Dr. Fletcher some more on is getting additional data to potentially see if we can't. What is the quality of the data if we merge across the two with an NR and R? Like, are there enough students? What do the grades look like? How is this all shaking out? So that is definitely something that's in progress, which is why everything is deemed preliminary. These aren't final judgment grades for any of these schools. So, any?
Thank you, Member Geyer. Would this be something, Chairman / Member Geyer, is this something that, as that communication unfolds with the department, something that you can bring back to this committee as an update for further?
Yes, Director Williams. Once I receive more information from Dr. Fletcher and the department, I will come back with more news and more stories on the missing data. That is at least the hope.
So, Director Williams and Member Geyer, now I can ask again the question about lowering the N count for English language learner measure. Do we still want to see, and the answer may still be yes, the impact with the current preliminary letter grades versus what would happen if this prorated comes through, and I'm struggling a little bit because it says preliminary results, and it is preliminary results. But do you hear the question?
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Susman, I do not understand your question that you're asking.
Well, my question that I'm trying to ask is, we were talking when we talked about 2C, about breaking down the number of schools that are reported in this simple table and looking at what their preliminary letter grade is, so we could see the impact of lowering the N count to see, first of all, if NR schools are affected, and second, what the letter grade is of schools, and if making those 10% points available. Actually, I can't finish that question because then we would have to say, by lowering the N count, it would take another whole calculation of modeling the data to see if that would affect their letter grade. Do you still want to see that with what we have just seen about non-typical grade configurations? Because by using these merged and, I'm trying to look for the exact words, the merged models and the prorated models A, B, and C, that might address, it might suddenly make, not suddenly, but after a lot of work, some NR schools rated schools.
Chair Schlesman, if he takes the approach, he was, and make sure I'm correct on what you were saying, if you actually merge some of the student data, would that not make the school eligible for some of those measures? Because you said the next step you would take would be to actually merge some of the in counts of the students, just for, say, an EL?
For ELL, yeah.
Just for example.
Yeah, that is a question. There were some schools that had EL scores provided, but they did not have 20. They had like 15 students in them.
Yeah.
But just for example, if it's a 712 and you had your NR for ELL and 912 and maybe also in K8, but when you merge that student file, you're going to have your N count maybe for EL. If you decide to merge based on business rules.
and that might make it overly complicated, so we could just report on what currently is.
Chairman Schlesman, members of the committee, I think that although I understand how both play into one another, I think at this point we haven't seen any of the data of what would happen with lowering N count, right? But I don't necessarily want that to stop any work that other committee members are doing, because then that just puts us further behind on this timeline. So I would be very adamant in saying that we continue with what we have and we bring it back at the next meeting, and then those conversations occur. I cannot make a decision like that without seeing some of that N count ELL data.
And I also just want to add one point of caution here. It's possible we might have a school with 7 students in the ELL and K8 and 8 in 9 to 12, and then we're going to merge 7 and then 8 data based on 7 and then 8 together. That seems a bit. If you want to talk about error prone, that's like super error prone.
I agree.
Okay, Dr. Schlesman, Member Haladina, you have to leave shortly, correct?
Well, I think I have 1 minute left to give a report.
Okay, so why don't we skip over 2E, which is my report, and we move on to 2F, which is your report, so that you can do that prior to getting off the line.
Okay, now remind me what 2E and 2F is, because I thought basically one is called defining and measuring risk, and the other one is the validity study, I think. Is that right?
Dr. Yes. Go. Dr. Haladina, if you would just present with Dr. Beardsley on your 2 papers that you submitted, that would be 2F.
Okay, Audrey and I worked on this together, and we've collaborated before on things. So we developed 2 short papers with reference. I don't think anybody would be puzzled or confused by anything on this paper. All I wanted to point out, I think, was that free and reduced lunch is a very, very elementary and crude measure of risk. And if you look at the list of whatever number 21 variables, you'll see that that risk is a lot more complicated in free and reduced lunch. And another point is that when you look at children, individual children, students, many of them have multiple risk factors, and the more risk factors they have, the lower their achievement. I mean, that's an empirical result I think you'll find if you do a study. So the first paper merely lists the risk factors, and the second paper discusses a possible study where we might identify the risk factors and maybe come up with a more economical model for measuring risk that is more valid than free and reduced lunch. And but then there's 2 provisos at the end of the paper that point out that using a single test is really not advocated by the American Educational Research Association. And also these cohorts, there's a serious threat to validity in the sense that these cohorts, because of absenteeism or regular attendance and so on, there's a bias in their means. And I don't know how this is handled in any accountability model. I can't imagine how you correct for that. But anyway, the study intends to look at risk and see if we can eliminate the correlation between risk and performance on these measures, because we know there's a 0.61 or 0.59 correlation between free and reduced lunch and performance on these schools. So anyway, I have to go, so maybe Audrey can take questions and discuss it more.
Thank you, Member Haladina.
Okay, I'll stay on the phone if you need to meet your quorum, but I got to go.
Member Haladina, we're good on quorum, so you can hang up. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Member Beardsley, do you have anything additional to add to Member Haladina's report?
No, I think
it's both of your reports.
I'm sorry?
It's both of your reports. Yeah, it's
fine.
more than one.
So, no, I think I would just underscore that I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Theoretically, it could probably move forward if we agreed to the board in terms of whether they want to engage in this kind of study to get this captured more effectively. At least explore the options.
And Chairman Susman, members of the committee, and Member Beardsley, the item of additional risk factors was brought on by a board member requesting more information from the committee and from your knowledge base and Dr. Haladina's knowledge base of those additional risk factors. So I think the information that both of you have provided today will meet that board member's request for additional risk factors and the more information that she was seeking. So thank you for doing that research and providing that to this committee.
And Director Williams, because the board is interested in hearing from each technical advisory committee member, I will add that the citations to the American Educational Research Association are noteworthy citations, and in a sense, that activity is peer-reviewed, whereas some of the activity from foundations and other policy groups is not. So I think that if you want me to send that in an email, I would be happy to do that, that type of information should go before the board also.
Thank you, Dr. Susman.
And I saw some heads nod, so I would encourage the other technical advisory committee members that agree to send that also in an email, and any of you who disagree should state your position.
This is Christy Havana from an organization, and we obviously fundamentally agree that there should be an evaluation of risk factors and also a way to prevent them through school level and local programming, but are extraordinarily concerned with the recommendation number 2 that they're captured in the school accountability calculations by lowering expectations for students who need the most help. So we just want to be on record saying that yes, we should identify them, and yes, we should be looking for school-level programs that local entities can implement in order to remedy these deficiencies, but holding these students with great risk factors to lower expectations does not lead necessarily to a valid and reliable measure of student achievement or really capturing the purpose of school accountability for improving student-level outcomes.
This is Member Beardsley, and I'd like to respond to that comment. The current status of the research in this regard is that when all of these risk variables are available, they should always be included in these models. And that's a huge meta-analysis study that was just published by Corey Codell and colleagues. And I think the assumption that including these variables permits lower expectations of these types of students is not a strong assumption. So I'd like to put that on the record as well.
Chairman / Member Beardsley, can you send me a link to that study so that I can read it? So I can read it?
Sure.
Thank you.
And please, Director Williams, share that study with all of us.
I will, Dr. / members of the committee, I'll share it with all of you, as well as both Member Beardsley's comments and Member Havanich's comments will be included in the record for the report that goes to the board. If there are no other comments, if we can go back to 2E, which is the free and reduced lunch correlation.
Yeah, you were going to update us,
Yep.
Please.
Mm-hmm. So, Chairman / members of the committee, I just left this on the agenda because it was something that we talked about at our last TAC meeting that occurred directly after the December 4th State Board meeting. So I just wanted to, again, make you aware that there has been some board members who want to see a continued investigation of the FRL correlation when we are discussing the final letter grades. So really that was just an update from me. It most likely will not be on the next agenda because we do have to figure out a lot of these pieces and finish the findings of our assignments and present those prior to running any type of correlation. So that's just my update. And Member Susman, if there are no other comments or questions from members, we can move on to agenda item number 3. Okay.
I see no other questions or comments.
Yes. Chairman / members of the committee, we have determined that Fridays in the afternoon are the best time for a standing committee of the Technical Advisory Committee. So I am assuming we could typically start at 2 or 2:30. If people have any issues coming in at 2 o'clock, it should get you out of here about 5. If it's a longer meeting, earlier. If it's a shorter meeting, you should miss a lot of the traffic, since Fridays traffic typically starts earlier, which I know is some of your concerns. With the conversations that we have had today and the additional data that is needed to complete some of the projects that we were going to discuss today, it seems as if committee members who have a little bit more work to do could complete that work within a week. So do we want to look at potentially scheduling something for next Friday around the same time? And if that's a yes, if you think that that is enough time for you to complete things and work with the department. then I can go ahead and tentatively schedule that for Friday. And if you have any issues, and you can just email me.
Yeah, Director Williams, I'm waiting on, I'm going to be dependent on information from the department, so however long that takes to process is my timeline. Yeah.
Same.
I should be able to finish my assignment, but the ones that are pending information from the department, that's very vital. Mm-hmm. So we can tentatively say that, but then I don't see any reason for us to meet if that information is not available yet.
Correct. So we can, we have Friday the 12th and Friday the 19th. Tell you what, I'll talk with the department, and I will figure out how long it will take for you all to get what you need from the department. We will keep Fridays at 2 open for now. That way the field also knows and different stakeholders know, like, hey, the technical advisory committee is going to meet on Fridays. That's their standing time. Mm-hmm. Depending on the workload, we can meet every Friday. We can meet every other Friday, once a month Friday, if our workload's not that heavy. But I'll work with the department to figure out how long it'll take for you to get the data that you need to complete your tasks. And then I will work with Kellen or Melissa and send out a calendar invite for you. Member Jordan, did you have a question?
Nope.
No. Okay. Was there anything else from the committee in terms of future meetings or agenda items?
Hearing no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll move to adjourn the meeting. So.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So the meeting is adjourned at 4:56 or 7.
3:57.
Oh, 3. Yeah, exactly. Whew. I'm an hour ahead of it. We will get ahead of that rush hour traffic.
Thank you.